Hello everyone and welcome back to another session of Elden Ring PvP and another weapon showcase. Today we are taking a look at the Zamor curved sword. This is a weapon that I do have a few mixed feelings on. The weapon is great as far as aesthetics. I love the look of the weapon, I love the moveset and how twirly it is. It just feels very fancy, and it's fun to use. But there are some major problems with this weapon that cause me to very strongly dislike it. So let's go ahead and start off with the basics. This weapon is acquired in the Giant Conquering Hero's grave, and it is dropped by the boss, the Ancient Hero of Zamor. The weapon requires 16 strength and 18 dexterity to wield, and it weighs 9 units. The skill of the weapon is Zamor Ice Storm, and you are stuck with it because this is a somber weapon. At plus 10, it has a physical base damage of 306, and will deal 65 frostbite per hit, and it will have a C scaling in strength, a B in dexterity, and it is unfortunately, because of that, a quality weapon. So it is already not in a good place as far as weapons are concerned in this game. Quality weapons are unfortunately best on quality builds, and quality builds don't really stack up all that well compared to pure strength or pure dexterity, or pure intelligence or faith for that matter either. Quality builds are unfortunately just kind of bad. So, a couple of unique things about this weapon, ones I won't necessarily consider pros or cons, just things that are unique about it. The farther you are into your R1 chain, whether one-handed or two-handed, the higher the motion value of the weapon goes. It has the same base motion values as all of the other curved greatswords. However, when you get to the final swing of your R1 chain, the motion value of that final swing is actually pretty darn high. It's actually quite a significant amount higher than the initial base value of your first swing, which that base value of the first swing on all other curved swords is the same. So because of that, if you can actually land a hit with some of the swings later in the moveset with your R1 chain, it will actually deal significantly more damage than your initial R1 would do, which is interesting, especially if you combine it with the Twin Blade Talisman, where the final swing in your chain will deal an extra 20% damage. That, in combination with the higher motion value, can lead to some pretty good damage, but good luck actually successfully landing the hit. You'll need it. Aside from that, the stamina drain to swing this weapon is actually significantly less compared to the other curved greatswords. To put it in perspective, it actually has nearly the same stamina drain on almost all of its attacks as Eleonora's Pole Blade. So the fact that a curved greatsword and a twin blade have similar stamina drain is quite impressive. For another comparison, it actually falls in between certain katanas. The Hand of Melania is actually quite similar to this in terms of stamina drain as well. So that really does go to show this doesn't take much in the way of stamina to spam away with it. So that is not a bad thing. The downside, though, is, well, we'll get into the downsides in a minute. Let's start off with the very small list of pros. First off, damage on this weapon, it's fine. If you actually invest into making a quality build, the damage on this is pretty decent. If you stick with just a dexterity build, it will also be okay, but not nearly as good. It does get a decent amount of damage from that C scaling in strength, so you really do, unfortunately, want a quality build for this weapon to be at its best. And aside from that, the only other pro of this weapon, in my opinion, is that it looks pretty darn fancy, and while you are doing those fancy spins for your attacks, you do actually have a decent amount of hyper armor, so you can take advantage of that fact as well. The skill of the weapon has its own set of pros. It does deal a good amount of damage, it will deal a good amount of frostbite damage as well, and if frostbite procs while someone is active in it, it does have a good chance to actually continue to stagger them after that initial frostbite proc. So, with that, you'll be able to stack up your damage from the skill pretty darn well. That said, it also has a decent amount of area that it covers, If you have someone running in at you, then they may very well just run in and get hit by one of the last bursts of ice spinning around, even after you've moved out of the way. That is something I have seen from time to time, as you saw in this fight here. Aside from that, it does give you some options for providing a bit of an area of denial, so if you do need to have your opponent back off of you for a minute, just throw down the ice storm and you'll be good to go. That said, there are some issues with it. One other good pro, of course, would be the insane amount of hyper armor it gets. It's similar to Gravitas and Starcaller Cry in that regard, where the hyper armor, when you put this thing in the ground, is pretty darn good. You can trade hits, and you will do a very good job with it. Of course, it doesn't reduce the amount of damage you take, but your opponent will end up taking significant damage if you go for that trade. But the cons of it. Unfortunately, with the skill, starting off with the big con in that, you actually can stagger your opponent by thrusting the sword into the ground, but it will not damage your opponent, which is really kind of dumb. The fact that you hit them, they get staggered, and then they take no damage is very, very unfortunate, and I feel like it's an oversight more than anything, so that may be fixed at some point in the future. Another big issue with this one is the range. This thing is short. The moveset does not do it any favors. It is very, very short. A lot of hammers and axes actually have a longer reach than this, which is a huge shame, because we all know how not great hammers and axes are, and a big part of that is because they are short and don't have much forward momentum. This thing is in the same boat. It does not have much forward momentum. And the final nail in the coffin with this weapon is the swing speed. Assuming the frame data on the internet is to be believed, this weapon is actually significantly slower than the other curved greatswords. That much is clear by just looking at it and comparing it. But the actual extent of how much slower is, to be perfectly honest, a little bit shocking. Provided that the frame data online is correct, it's actually 12 full frames slower than any other curved greatsword at 60 frames per second, which is honestly just absolutely awful. So that's all I've got on this thing. I hope you've enjoyed the video, found it helpful in one way or another. If you did enjoy this video, then please do all the YouTube things, like, subscribe, and all of that good stuff. And I will see you all next time.